This video was brought to you by Henson. For most of recent history, Ireland has been one of the most pro-immigrant countries out there. Ireland took in more Ukrainian refugees on a per capita basis than basically any other Western European country, and a 2018 Eurobarometer poll found that Ireland was the most pro-immigrant country in the EU, with 80% of Irish voters saying that immigrant integration had been successful, compared to just 54% in the EU as a whole. Similarly, 72% of Irish voters expressed a very or moderately positive view of immigrants, compared to just 54% in the EU as a whole. However, in the past few months, that has apparently changed. A series of anti-migrant attacks and riots in Ireland have hit the international headlines, and enthusiasm for immigration amongst Irish voters and politicians has apparently waned. So, in this video, we're going to look at what's happened recently, why Irish attitudes to immigration have changed, and how this might affect Irish politics.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos.
So let's start by taking a look at the recent events. This story really hit the international headlines in mid-November, when hundreds of rioters took to the streets of Dublin after 3 children and a creche worker were stabbed by an Algerian-born immigrant. The riots were enormous. Social media was flooded with dystopian cityscapes of burning cars and street fights, and the state had to deploy more riot police than ever before in Ireland's history. However, while this was the first to hit the international headlines, this wasn't the first anti-immigrant incident Ireland's seen this year. In January, 4 men assaulted a makeshift refugee camp on a riverbank in Dublin, and in May, a group burnt down another makeshift refugee camp in the same area, known as Tent City. These makeshift refugee camps were set up near Ireland's International Protection Office, which is supposed to deal with asylum claims, after the Irish authorities ran out of refugee housing. The events drew criticism from across the Irish political spectrum. Taoiseach Leo Varadkar said he condemned the violence unreservedly, describing it as malign opportunism, and Sinn Féin described it as racism, pure and simple. Then, a few weeks after the Dublin riots, in mid-December, a fire broke out at a hotel in County Galway that was due to accommodate 70 asylum seekers, in what police are now treating as an anti-migrant-inspired arson attack. While Varadkar once again criticised the incident, 2 days later, he admitted the Irish government needed clearer communication with the public about immigration to combat disinformation and what he described as absolute myths propagated on social media to do with Ireland's migration policies. This all comes after similar comments by Trade Minister Simon Coveney in late November, who criticised the Dublin riots but admitted that the government needs to, quote, listen to what people are saying and address concerns about immigrant integration in local communities. These comments tacitly acknowledge the fact that while the rioters and perpetrators of these crimes obviously don't at all represent your average Irish person, there has nonetheless been an uptick in anti-immigrant sentiment in Ireland's general public. In a poll by Red C for the Business Post, carried out in May of this year, some 75% of Irish people agreed with the statement, "I think the number of refugees Ireland is taking in is now too many," while only 19% disagreed. This is up from 68% in February and 60% last year. While Sinn Féin and independent voters were most likely to say they felt too many refugees were being allowed in, some 74% of Fianna Fáil voters and 70% of Fine Gael voters also agreed with the statement, demonstrating that there's now a cross-party consensus that Ireland has taken in too many migrants. Similarly, another poll by Ireland Thinks in early December found the number of voters citing immigration as a top priority had risen 9 points in a month, making it the 3rd highest priority behind the country's housing crisis and the cost of living crunch. So why has one of the most pro-immigrant EU countries apparently soured on the issue? Well, simply put, the main reason is probably that the number of people immigrating to Ireland has risen steeply in recent years. To be clear, we're not saying anything normative here. We're not saying that it's a good or a bad thing that Ireland's taken in more migrants, but this fact has clearly had an impact on what the Irish public thinks about immigration more widely. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Ireland has taken in over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees, one of the highest per capita reception rates in all of Europe. For context, that means that, again, on a per capita basis, Ireland has accepted 6 times as many Ukrainian refugees as the UK. On top of that, Ireland has also seen an uptick in non-Ukrainian asylum seekers. According to the European Migration Network, in 2022, Ireland received nearly 14,000 asylum applications, 5 times as many as in 2021, and there's due to be a similar number this year in 2023. These two facts mean that immigration is now at a 16-year high, with nearly 150,000 people arriving in 2023 alone. Now, while 150,000 people might not sound like that many if you live in a big country, it's worth remembering that Ireland has a population of just over 5 million, which means that nearly 3% of the population is made up of people who have moved to Ireland only in the past year. Ireland now has a foreign-born population of nearly 1 million people, or roughly 18% of the total population, one of the highest ratios in the EU. However, it's not just the number of migrants that's causing concern in Ireland. Even if you leave aside the moral question of how many immigrants or refugees a state should receive, it's clear that Ireland doesn't have the administrative capacity to receive this many, which is why these makeshift migrant camps have started appearing in Dublin. In February, Ireland was already urging asylum seekers not to travel to Ireland if they were in a safe place, because of what it described as a severe shortage of accommodation. In November, the government cautioned that its unlimited compassion for Ukrainian refugees was not matched by its capacity to house them, and then earlier this month, it said it no longer had space for new asylum seekers. You can see quite how difficult this problem is just by looking at the number of asylum seekers requiring state housing, which started spiking after Putin's invasion and is now roughly 10 times what it was only a few years ago. According to the most recent data, 26,000 asylum seekers currently require housing, with most coming not from Ukraine but Africa. The government just doesn't have the capacity to house this many asylum seekers, so, like the UK, it's resorted to hiring out hotels for them. And over 17,000 of these asylum seekers are now in what the government calls emergency accommodation. This hasn't gone down well in parts of the Irish electorate, not just because it's quite expensive for the taxpayer, but also because it interacts in politically uncomfortable ways with Ireland's housing crisis, which is one of the worst in Europe. This leads us on to the third reason Ireland is apparently souring on immigration. Ireland isn't as wealthy as it first seems. If you look at headline figures like GDP, Ireland looks immensely wealthy. According to the IMF, for example, Ireland's GDP per capita is about $145,000, the highest in the world and nearly triple that of the UK. The World Bank puts it slightly lower at $106,000, but that still puts Ireland in third place, after just Luxembourg and Singapore, and twice that of the UK. Looking at these numbers, you might assume that Ireland is a super wealthy, underpopulated island that should be able to take in millions of refugees. But GDP figures massively overstate real Irish wealth, because Ireland is a sort of international tax haven. Ireland's headline corporation tax rate is just 12.5%, which is already one of the lowest in the developed world. But in reality, foreign corporations actually pay even less, thanks to clever accounting tricks which are in turn facilitated by Ireland's global network of bilateral tax treaties. This is why loads of big companies, including mega brands like Apple, Google and Amazon, have all set up shop in Ireland, and this massively inflates Ireland's GDP. In reality though, Irish living standards are actually pretty average, and like the rest of Europe, most Irish people are currently struggling with the cost of living crisis, which has in turn been exacerbated by Ireland's acute housing crisis. Relative to incomes, Irish houses are amongst the most expensive in Europe, and home ownership rates have fallen from 79% in 1991 to 66% today, with the sharpest decrease there amongst young people, most of whom just can't afford to put down a deposit. This has made the government's decision to house asylum seekers in hotels particularly contentious, especially among the more right-wing parts of the Irish electorate. So there are three reasons Ireland has apparently soured on immigration: the uptick in numbers, the strain that's put on Ireland's asylum system, and the politically uncomfortable ways this all interacts with Ireland's ongoing housing crisis.
I've been using Henson's products for a few months now, and I really do recommend them from an economic, environmental, and shave perspective. Firstly, Henson's razors take entirely standard razor blades, which means instead of being forced to buy expensive replacement blades, including features you don't even need, Henson's razors cost about 10 cents each, allowing you to replace your blades more frequently and cut down costs significantly. Now, admittedly, the razor itself may cost more than other brands, but over the lifetime of the products, it quickly becomes a lot cheaper than buying all of those expensive replacement blades. This razor model is also better for the environment, with the Henson AL13 and all of its packaging being entirely plastic-free. Plus, unlike those expensive multi-blade upsells that other companies will push, even the blades themselves are plastic-free, helping to cut down on the over 2 billion disposable razors that are thrown away every year in the US alone. Finally, Henson's beautiful razors are precision engineered by an aerospace machine company who previously built parts for the Mars rover and the ISS, which means incredibly tight tolerances, high standards, and superb precision. And all of this combined means that while a single razor blade might sound scary, I've found it far easier to use than other comparable products, with a precise shave plane of about 0.0013 inches, offering a safe and perfect shave, while also minimizing the risk of ingrown hairs and irritation. So if you too want to try out Henson, then you can get 100 free blades with your purchase by clicking the link in the description, adding the razor and the blades to your basket, and then using our code. Thanks to Henson for sponsoring this video, and to you for supporting TLDR News.